the sky is the limit. I mean, redevelopment, like public housing redevelopment is going to happen. There's no if it's going to happen. There's no like, well, maybe, you know, in 10 years. No, ground is about to be broken.
So public housing redevelopment had been, on, I guess, the daily things to do list for FAR. I think CRHA had invested a significant amount of time, but didn't think, it was possible in 2018 that we would get to where we are now. And the families who live in our public housing communities, they had been told for over 20 years that redevelopment would happen at some point, and it hadn't happened. So I think until there's a structure up, they still, will be kind of skeptical of the process.
They started talking about this in 1991 when Delegate Toscano was then the mayor, and I was 6 years old. But no, it's finally starting to happen. But when Mayor Walker came in, now there's two of us who understand the importance of this, and two of us supporting the Housing Authority in that regard, and now more resources being put into it, and us being consistent with this being at the forefront of the conversation and all that we do from a budgetary standpoint.
Getting the funding, all the financing, the structure straight. There'll be some public housing units, some subsidized units, some market rate, not market rate, but some up to 60% AMI units. Dave Norris and I have talked about across the street from the First Street Phase 1, if we can do some housing units there that individuals can purchase. So he thinks that 25 to 30 units can be built on that property that can kind of be a stair step. And that just stems from a conversation. So if then, Dave, what? Like if you could make anything happen. And part of the struggle is to build that kind of stair step out of the public subsidized housing for people who are ready at, affordable rates, which we don't have in town.
I will say I remember my first meeting on the Housing Authority Board when I first got on council, and just seeing the state of the Housing Authority Board and the things that we could do different, and then lobbying my colleagues on council, let's put money into this, let's put money into that, and then we wrote the first equity package that allocated $2.5 million towards public housing redevelopment. And I think that's kind of what got a lot of this stuff started. That was like the seed money to start a lot of this. It was at that point when we started really seeing plans being drawn up, redevelopment committees being developed and created, people starting to talk about, all right, this is what we really can do. I really started to believe at that point, like, all right, like this is really going to happen.
So I think going into that first retreat in January 2018 and asking for a $50 million bond, that put affordable housing at the top of the list in terms of the city finding the funding for it. So the conversation shift from whether CRHA was in the red, whether they should be responsible for their own funding, because I would often ask every time that came up, where would they get it? Where would they get the money? And the individuals who were asking other counselors, other city staff members, they knew that they would never be able to come up with the funding to do this on their own. And we were acting as if they were a separate entity when they are, but they are not. And we're talking about families, our families. And so that shifted the conversation, and it started the process where in the CIP, the last budget cycle, there was significant amount of dollars put towards affordable housing. So the, $12 million between Friendship Court and CRHA, and then other, housing streams like AHIP, Habitat, that are normally funded, still receive some resources too.
The sky is the limit. I mean, redevelopment, like public housing redevelopment is going to happen. There's no if it's going to happen. There's no like, well, maybe, in 10 years. No, ground is about to be broken. Redevelopment committees are in play. I just left South First Street earlier today, in which They're literally talking about what they're going to be putting inside the units, from the sink to the kitchen to the bedrooms. Like, it's real.
I'm not worried at this point because, FAR has their residence bill of rights. And I really believe that they will make sure that people are okay. And then the plan for now is that I will be the counselor rep on the Housing Authority Board. So unless my colleagues feel differently about that, then I'll know everything that's going on within housing. So I'll be able to help with that, not only just as a counselor, but as the counselor liaison on the Housing Authority Board.
So I'm very glad that it's happening. And I'm just going to stick with, yes, I knew it was going to happen, because I knew that we could do it. But if I'm being honest, I'll just say this one last thing. When we talked about a little bit earlier, what advice would you give to new counselors? Sometimes, you don't need to go in thinking that you can do everything and that you have to be Superman, but it doesn't hurt to sometimes think that you can't fail. It doesn't hurt sometimes to have such a belief in yourself that no matter what you set your mind to, that you're going to do it. No matter what, you can push this to get done. Because there have been some very difficult days in that regard. And before Mayor Walker came on, I remember my old council, just not wanting to give money in certain regards, and me just pushing them and saying, no, we're going to give the Housing Authority these dollars. And now look at where we are. I'm just really, really happy.
Mello, you a fool for this one, boy.
In 96, we was in the Estes parking lot. I'm not a talker, so you never hear me talk a lot. I'ma tell a story of what happened back then. It's the story of some enterprising black men. Y'all remember when Estes used to be jumping, the vendors out and somebody had the beats bumping. My man Papers, yeah, he got the mixtapes, the fly gear from up top. Yo, what up, Dave? Ronnie Anderson over on the chessboard. I seen some cats come from Harlem.